All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking Elizabeth Barrett Browning's famous poem, Sonnet 43. Now, this is a piece of literature most of us know, or at least think we know. But today, we're going to look way past that overly familiar, kind of cheesy greeting card reputation. We're going to uncover the incredible technical brilliance, the defiant personal biography, and honestly, the subversive feminist subtext hiding right beneath its surface.
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I mean, we have to acknowledge right out of the gate that this is one of literature's absolute most recognizable opening lines. It's everywhere, right? It appears in weddings, in movies, pop culture. It almost feels too familiar to us today. But we are going to get into some detailed textual discussion and look closely at what these specific words actually achieve. Because beneath this super romantic surface is a carefully constructed masterpiece of textual architecture.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with Beyond the Greeting Card, then look at the architecture of love, measuring the immeasurable, grief, faith, and eternity, and finally, subverting Victorian courtly love.
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, Beyond the Greeting Card.
To truly understand this text, we absolutely have to start with Elizabeth's life before she ever penned that famous opening line. Elizabeth was born in 1806 into a lot of privilege, but her life was marked by severe, lingering illness and a ridiculously domineering father. He essentially kept her isolated as an invalid in her room on Wimpole Street. But her world completely flipped upside down in 1845 when she got a fan letter from a fellow poet, Robert Browning. This sparked a secret courtship told across 575 passionate letters. Because her father absolutely refused to let her leave, she secretly married Robert in 1846, and they literally eloped to Florence, Italy. Her father instantly disowned her. She chose love over everything she knew. And out of that profound, life-altering romance came a collection of 44 sonnets written during those first few crazy years of her marriage. Sonnet 43 is actually the next to last poem in this sequence. Now, the title of the collection is super fascinating, Sonnets from the Portuguese. They weren't actually translated from Portuguese at all. Elizabeth used this title as a clever literary disguise. Portuguese was just Robert's affectionate nickname for her, and she used it to make these deeply personal, intensely emotional poems feel a bit less autobiographical to the very strict Victorian public.
Which brings us to Section 2, the architecture of love.
To contain her overflowing emotion, Browning used incredibly strict, rigid poetic rules. First up, iambic pentameter. This poem is literally a masterclass in following this specific rhythm. Think of an iamb as a 2-beat unit that sounds remarkably like a human heartbeat, da-dum. Pentameter just means there are 5 of these rhythmic units per line. You know, English teachers love pointing out that this specific meter is so popular because it naturally mimics the ebb and flow of everyday human speech.
Let's actually hear how she applies this. If we vocally demonstrate the meter on the opening line, emphasizing the stressed syllables, it sounds exactly like this. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. She takes that technical heartbeat rhythm of English poetry and bakes it directly into the opening structural question of her devotion. It's brilliant. Now, every single sonnet has exactly 14 lines, right? But there are different ways to build them. A traditional English or Shakespearean sonnet develops an idea for 12 lines and ends with a catchy, punchy 2-line rhyming twist. But Browning actively chose the Petrarchan or Italian structure instead. This format splits those 14 lines into an 8-line octave, followed by a twist, what we call a volta, and then a 6-line sestet. By choosing the Italian model over the English one, she purposely brought an exotic, romantic foreignness to her English poem.
And because she chose that Italian form, she was locked into its incredibly rigid rhyme scheme. It follows a strict AB-ABA, CD-CD pattern. Unlike Shakespeare, who used up to 7 different rhyming sounds in a single poem, Browning relies on only 4 across her entire text. 4. This constant repetition of fewer rhyming sounds creates a very heavy, prescribed, and obvious rhythm. It gives a definitive, solid shape to her emotion, holding it tightly in place without ever letting it spill over the edges.
Moving right along to Section 3, Measuring the Immeasurable.
Let's get into some close textual analysis here and see how Browning tries to quantify an emotion that completely defies all limitations. The opening question asks to count the ways, which implies limits, right? mathematics, neat little lists. But immediately, she completely shatters that limitation. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. She literally makes love three-dimensional. She gives the invisible soul an almost cosmic architectural scale. She's trying to measure something that occupies massive spiritual space. The way she builds that textual scale is completely fascinating. She uses the poetic device called anaphora. Notice the repeated phrase, I love thee, starting all of these lines. Rhythmically, it physically stacks the emotion on the page. It doesn't solve a math problem, it accumulates. It creates this musical, prayer-like intensity with each added layer, acting almost like a bell tolling, just growing stronger and more resonant every single time she says it.
Next up, Section 4, Grief, Faith, and Eternity. So now we transition into the second half of the poem, the sestet, where that volta or twist actually happens. Browning shifts from the grand, cosmic, and architectural right down to the earthly, historical, and spiritual. She writes, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. This is absolutely crucial. Love isn't just about lightning bolts and grand spiritual heights. It exists in practical, daily companionship. It's the quiet care that endures through the day, the sun, and the night, the candlelight.
Then she reveals her deep emotional history. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs. Remember her biographical context here, the illness, the isolation, the deep loss of family members. She's essentially saying that the intense, consuming passion she once poured into her suffering and the blind faith she had as a child, well, they haven't just disappeared. They've been repurposed. They've been beautifully transformed into romantic devotion. And that makes this love feel incredibly hard-earned.
And then we reach the final lines. Here she makes her absolute boldest claim yet. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Notice the humility there. If God choose, she isn't commanding the universe, but she is suggesting that her love isn't just a lifelong thing. It expands beyond mortality itself into eternity. The poem doesn't end with a neat conclusion, it just sort of expands into the infinite.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Subverting Victorian Courtly Love. Now, this is where we uncover a kind of academic Trojan horse. Modern scholars view this poem as way more than just a sweet romance. They read it as a deeply political text that dismantles the patriarchal structures of the 19th century. Academic analyses, like some fascinating research out of Massey University, point out an incredible tension for Victorian women poets. Traditionally, the love poet, the active subject doing the speaking and the desiring, was always male. The woman was just the silent object, a muse to be looked at. But Browning completely conflates these roles. She appropriates the intimate, traditionally male sonnet form and places herself as the active speaking subject who completely commands the narrative.
And we can hear this subversion directly in the text. Consider these lines. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. She isn't comparing her love to delicate flowers or passive submission, right? She is aligning her love with the active, ethical, moral, and principled pursuit of justice. It is a love that is completely unforced, a freely chosen moral conviction, and that directly defies the cultural expectation of Victorian female subservience.
So by commanding this language and claiming the courtly love tradition all for herself, Browning completely rewrites the rules for women in a patriarchal society. She steps out of the periphery as a silent invalid and becomes a powerful, active, and commanding voice. And honestly, the craziest part is she achieves this massive subversion of gender roles without ever once breaking the strict, prescribed meter of the poem. She beats the system from the inside.
Which leaves us with a totally fascinating question to close out our explainer today. If a poem bound by the absolute strictest 14-line Victorian rules can secretly rewrite the power dynamics of gender, what other so-called traditional romances are actually subversive manifestos hiding in plain sight? I highly encourage you to look way past the greeting card cliches the next time you read classic literature. The deepest complexities are usually hidden right there on the surface. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you read.